We're having a few technical issues, but I'll assume that it's passed. Yeah. Okay. Was there any business arising from those minutes from any members of the committee? Nothing? Good. The first item on our agenda today is the approval of the Port Williams Area Advisory Committee member. Maybe if you could put that up for me, Chloe, on the screen. There are several areas within the county that have their own area advisory committees, and Port Williams is one of those, and they've sent forth a motion for us to be forwarded on to Municipal Council that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council appoint Kimberly Cogswell to fill a vacancy on the Port Williams Area Advisory Committee for the remainder of a one-year term ending February 28th, 2024. Is there any questions or clarification on that? If not, a motion to approve. Ms. Gagnon, Councillor Allen. There's no debate. You can register your vote now. Great. So now we're on to our first matter of business, and that is an application to enter into a development agreement at 40 Rogers Lane in Aylesford, and that belongs to Ms. Jacob. Your light is on. It's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So this is an application for a development agreement to permit the replacement of a non-conforming dwelling with a one-unit dwelling at a property near Aylesford Lake. The map here shows the location of the subject property marked in red. The property is located at 40 Rogers Lane, Aylesford Lake, and the PID is 551772125. And this is the aerial view showing the location and the property boundary. So the property is located in the Lakeshore Residential S1 zone, shoreline designation. The zone allows for public and private opportunities for freshwater recreation, leisure activities, and habitation. And this here is the future land use map. The property will continue to be in the shoreline designation in the future as well. So the proposal here is to replace a non-conforming dwelling with a new one-unit dwelling. The non-conforming dwelling was used as a cottage by the applicant's family, and the new dwelling will also be used for the same purposes. So this new dwelling will be set within a building envelope measuring 26 feet by 32 feet, which will be slightly larger than the existing cottage. And the existing cottage has a 30 feet setback from the shoreline, which will be maintained by this new dwelling as well. So just to provide a background, the property has 4 existing structures at the moment. So there is the cottage and 3 other accessory structures. The accessory structures include a boathouse, pit privy, and also a structure containing a woodshed and a composting toilet. The cottage was built in the 1920s before the current municipal planning strategy or bylaws came into effect. So it does not conform to all the current requirements of the Lakeshore Residential Zone in which it is located. So according to the LUB, all new developments within the Lakeshore Residential Zone are required to have a minimum shoreline setback of 65 feet. The existing structure is only set back 30 feet from the shoreline. So this makes it a non-conforming structure. And the property also does not conform to the frontage requirements of the zone. So the main access to the property was from the North River Road, which was originally located over here. And the public road, this public road was later relocated to the north over here. This is the new North River Road. And the ownership of this old parcel of road was transferred to the North River Road Cottage Owners Association in 1984. So currently, to access the property, one must go through Rogers Lane, which is a shared access way that is located over here, this one, and then cross a parcel of an old alignment of the North River Road, which is over here. So this also makes it a non-conforming use. So because the property does not have any public or private road frontage, which is required for all new developments within the Lakeshore residential zone, it is considered a non-conforming use. So it is a non-conforming structure because it does not conform to the setback requirements, and it is a non-conforming use because it does not have any public or private road frontage. But it is permitted to exist legally because it has been in existence even before the municipal planning strategy or the current bylaws came into effect. And this development agreement is necessary because according to the MPS and LUB, any changes, alterations, expansion, or reconstruction of a non-conforming use in a non-conforming structure can only be considered through a development agreement. Also, another thing to note is the property is also considered as an existing undersized lot because it does not conform to the lot area requirements of the zone. So in the Lakeshore residential zone, properties are required to have a minimum lot area of 50,000 square feet, but the subject property has only 30,138 square feet of area. But according to the LUB, any lot in existence prior to May 5, 1992 that has less than the minimum frontage or area or both are categorized as existing undersized lot, and these lots are allowed to be used for the purpose permitted in the zone. So this does not affect the proposal in any way. I just had to mention it to provide a background. So this is a site plan showing the existing structures. Over here is a cottage, and these structures on the site, one is a pit privy and the other is a structure containing the woodshed and the composting toilet. And over here towards the lake is a boathouse. So the main access, as I mentioned earlier, is from the north, from over here. And from here the property rises upward. And this area which has been developed is relatively flat, and these structures sit on a higher elevation. And then the site slopes downward towards the lake. So the boathouse over here sits on a lower elevation. And regarding the neighborhood, the property is located in an area which is mostly developed with residential dwellings. And the neighboring property over here, there is a dwelling, and there is also a dwelling on the north over here. And these are some of the photographs of the subject property. On top here is a key map for reference. The yellow spot on the map marks the access to the property, shown here in the image to the left. You can see how the property rises upward. And the blue spot on the map is the location of the neighboring property to the north, which is shown in the image to the right. Again, the yellow spot on the map is the location of the existing structures, shown in the image to the left. And the blue spot on the map marks the location of the boathouse, which is shown in the image to the right. Here, the image on the left is a neighboring dwelling to the east of the property, shown with a yellow marking on the map. And the image on the right is the location of the septic system, which was installed on site in December 2022. The notification of installation was sent to Nova Scotia Environment. And the blue spot on the map shows the location of the septic system. So the property is covered with rich and mature vegetation. These are the images showing the vegetation on the property towards the south and southwest portion, which abuts the Aylesford Lake. The applicant has expressed her intentions to retain this vegetative buffer, which is consistent with the requirements of the zone. And this here is a proposed site plan. So as I mentioned earlier, the new dwelling will be replacing the existing cottage, and it will be located within this building envelope measuring 26 feet by 32 feet. And the applicant intends to retain the existing deck, which will be contained within this envelope. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the existing cottage has a 30 feet setback from the shoreline, which will be maintained by the new dwelling as well. So this is a section from the LUB that enables this development agreement. So this section further directs us to section 14.7. And section 14.7 states, uses considered by development agreement in all zones. The municipal planning strategy provides that the items detailed below may be considered by the development agreement. 14.7.5, expansion of non-conforming uses and structures, which includes extension, enlargement, alteration of a non-conforming use in a structure, the reconstruction of a non-conforming structure, or the extension of a non-conforming use of land in accordance with policy 3.0.3 of the municipal planning strategy. So before I move on to the policy from the MPS that enables this application, I'll first provide a brief summary of what the Municipal Government Act specifies in relation to non-conforming structures and uses. So within sections 238 to 241, the MGA permits the enlargement, reconstruction, repair, and renovations of non-conforming structures and uses to some extent. But the MGA also requires that these developments follow certain regulations of the zone in which it is located. But further within section 242, within the MGA, which is shown here, the MGA also discusses further relaxation of these restrictions that the municipal planning strategy may provide with respect to non-conforming structures and uses. So the section states, a municipal planning strategy may provide for a relaxation of the restrictions contained in this part, respecting non-conforming structures, non-conforming uses of land, and non-conforming uses in a structure, and in particular may provide for the extension, enlargement, alteration, or reconstruction of a non-conforming structure, and a few other relaxations as well. And 2, it also states the policies adopted in accordance with this section shall be carried out through the land use bylaw and may require a development agreement. So based on that sections from the MGA, in section 3.0, general policies of the MPS, the Council recognizes that it is reasonable to provide for a relaxation of the restrictions pertaining to non-conforming structures and uses and provide flexibility for expansion, alteration, reconstruction, and so on through a development agreement. So this here is a policy within section 3.0 of the MPS that enables this development agreement. So the policy 3.0.3 reads, consider only by development agreement the expansion, alteration, or reconstruction of a non-conforming use in a structure, the reconstruction of a non-conforming structure, or the extension of a non-conforming use of land in all designations. In evaluating such development agreements, Council shall be satisfied that A, the use will not adversely affect adjacent land uses, B, adequate buffering, setback, or separation distances are maintained to reduce visual and other impacts on surrounding uses, and E, the proposal meets the general development agreement criteria set out in section 5.3, development agreements and amending the land use bylaw. So regarding criteria A, the proposed one-unit dwelling will be replacing an existing cottage, which is similar in nature to the adjacent land uses. So it is not expected to adversely affect the adjacent land uses. And regarding criteria B, the site plan shows that the proposed dwelling will have a 40 feet setback from the neighboring property to the east. And the property is also approximately 84 feet from the properties on the north. And the south and the west ends of the property abuts the lake and also has rich and mature vegetative buffer. So based on all these aspects, staff do not expect that the replacement would cause any negative impacts on the surrounding land uses. The property is located in the Lakeshore Residential Zone, and the intent of the zone states, Council shall establish the following shoreline zones in the land use bylaw. A. Lakeshore residential, S1. So lands within the zone are intended to provide public and private opportunities for freshwater water-related recreation, leisure activities, and permanent habitation while minimizing the impact of development on freshwater bodies. So the main intention of the zone is to minimize any negative impacts on the lake. And because of this, the zone permits only a limited number of residential uses like one-unit dwellings and a few other non-residential uses. So the proposed one-unit dwelling, even though it's a non-conforming use in a non-conforming structure, is still a use permitted within the zone. Also, the various regulations specified in the LUB, like the footprint restriction, setback requirements, and shoreline vegetation requirements, these restrictions all serve to reduce the amount of runoff entering the lake and to prevent any negative impacts on the lake. So if we take a look at the building footprint, based on the provisions of the LUB, the proposed development is permitted to have a total combined building footprint of 2,500 square feet. However, the proposed dwelling and the existing accessory structures put together will have a combined building footprint of only 1,124 square feet, which is less than the permitted footprint. And if we look at the setback requirements, so I mentioned earlier that the area containing the existing development is relatively flat, and the cottage and the other accessory structures, they sit on a higher elevation. And from there, the site slopes down towards the north, west, and the south. So if we require the new dwelling to be located 65 feet from the lake, according to the LUB, current regulations, this would mean that the site will have to be altered drastically through grading and contouring to accommodate this new development. Also, regarding the vegetation, again, as I mentioned earlier, except for the area which has been developed with the existing structures and the area where the septic system was installed, the rest of the site is covered with rich and mature vegetation. So if a new dwelling is to be located anywhere else other than the proposed location, this might lead to clearing of at least a part of this mature vegetation. And another aspect that the staff considered is the location of the septic system. So according to the provincial regulations, septic systems are required to be located 100 feet away from any watercourse. So the current location of the septic system over here is based on this regulation. And so this makes it further hard to push the development backward or locate it anywhere else than the proposed location. Also, the proposed site plan shows that the development will maintain the existing 30 feet setback and will not be located any closer to the lake. So after considering all these factors, staff are of the opinion that the proposed location would be appropriate for the development. The proposal was also assessed against various criteria listed under 5.3.7 general policies of the MPS. The proposal is in keeping with the intent of the MPS. No financial impact is expected from the proposal. The development will be compatible with the surrounding land uses, and the property benefits from access easements, enabling access to the new North River Road. So staff do not have any concerns regarding the network adequacy, and no hazards or congestion are expected from the proposal. Also, Kentville Fire Chief has confirmed the adequacy of fire protection services to the property. And municipal sewer and water services do not extend to the area, but as I mentioned earlier, there is a septic system on the property which was installed in 2022, and the applicant also intends to install a well on the property. So regarding negative impacts on the lake water quality, the proposal represents the replacement of an existing dwelling with a modest expansion, so no negative impacts on the lake are expected. The site is suitable in terms of grades, soils, and geological conditions. In terms of our process, we are currently at stage 4, which is the Planning Advisory Committee. Under the planning policies of the municipality, a public information meeting was not required. PIMs are only required if a development agreement seeks to add a new use, and AAC was not required either. So this proposal to replace an existing cottage with a one-unit dwelling is not expected to create a substantial change in the neighborhood or the lake water quality. The proposal is found to be consistent with the intent of the MPS. As a result, staff are forwarding a positive recommendation to the Planning Advisory Committee, and the recommendation is up there. With that, I pass it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. For the benefit of our new counselor, our normal procedure here is before the motion is put on the floor, I open it up for questions of clarification. If anyone has any questions of staff, this is the time to do it. Once the motion is put on the floor, I won't allow any questions of staff. From that point on, it's debate, and that's amongst ourselves. Okay? So if there are any questions of clarification, I'll entertain them now. Ms. Friars.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. A question about the setback. I think I noticed in the report it was measured 30 feet from the corner of the deck. And I'm just wondering if they are going to retain the deck in the same location, or if they were looking at moving the corner of the new structure to that 30-foot setback and use the deck. I just want clarification about that.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to bring up this slide over here. So this is the new building envelope, and the existing deck will be maintained in the same location as the previous, the new deck will be maintained in the same location as the previous one.
Okay.
So it will have a 30-feet setback from the shoreline.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just wanted to clarify, there's actually not a requirement to keep that decking. Just to clarify, the requirement would be all of the residential development needs to be contained within the envelope, however that ends up being. So use the deck, not use the deck, but if there is a deck, it needs to be within the envelope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of clarification? Nothing? Can you put the motion back up, please, or the recommendation? So the recommendation before us is the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit the replacement of a non-conforming dwelling with a one-unit dwelling at 40 Rogers Lane, PID 551-77125, Aylesford Lake, which is substantively the same, save for minor differences in form, as the draft set out in Appendix D of the report dated August 8, 2023. Can I have a mover, please? Ms. Gagnon. Second, Ms. Friars. Thank you. And now it's open for debate. Is there any? We're all good? Then I'll call the question, and you can register your votes now. Thank you, Ms. Jacob. And that passes. Thank you. So we'll move on to our second item of business, an application to enter into a development agreement on Long Point Road in Harbourville. And this will be presented by Ms. Mosier. Your mic is on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Councillor Armstrong mentioned, we are here to discuss a development agreement to permit tourist cabins at 3278 and 3280 Long Point Road in Harbourville. So the proposal comes to us. The two cottages or two dwellings are existing. However, the current owner purchased these properties in 2019-2020 and constructed a deck spanning between the two structures, as you can see in the photo on the screen. Currently, that's not permitted under our land use bylaw. All development needs to be fully contained on a given lot, and so we are here to consider legalizing this use, which we're considering the expansion of a non-conforming use. So Alice took you through the Municipal Government Act in our last presentation really well, so I'm not going to go over the same, but these two cottages have been operating as cottages for a significant amount of time. I think our records, we found records going back to 1950s where these have been operated as rental cottages. They are quite small, and so we are considering these a non-conforming use, and we are considering the application of this deck or construction of this deck as an expansion of those uses. Harbourville is located in the north portion of Kings County at the top of Highway 360. This is an aerial photo of the area. As you can see, this is very much right on the water, with the properties on the other side of Long Point Road having direct ocean frontage. These two properties are roughly 4,400 square feet in area combined, so and have a current road frontage of 60 feet. The existing structures, having been constructed in let me start that again. The two structures, having been constructed well in advance of digital mapping, currently extend into the roadway both to the front and to the rear. This, at some point in the history, Long Point Road was redirected. This used to be where Long Point Road ran, and it was moved here. And so these two structures extend into the roadway in the front as well as the rear. However, the current owner has consulted with the Department of Public Works and has received a license permitting them to continue to extend into the roadway, as this has been the original condition since construction. The two properties are located in the tidal shoreland zone, which is, we apply to areas along the coast, and our exhibit residential development. So the T1 is primarily for residential development. Within our designation, we're in the shoreland designation along the Fundy coast. So in terms of our policy review, and again, Alice went over this in our last presentation, so I will probably go quite quickly. So policy 3.0.3 states that council shall consider only by development agreement the expansion, alteration, or reconstruction of a non-conforming use in a structure, the reconstruction of a non-conforming structure, or the extension of a non-conforming use of land in all designations. Similar to our last presentation, these cottages and this use are both considered non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures, as the properties do not currently meet the requirements of the land use bylaw in terms of the use being permitted in the zone and the setback requirements. In evaluating such agreements, council shall be satisfied that the use will not adversely affect adjacent land uses, given the uses have been there since the 50s, so roughly 70 years, where staff is confident that there will be no additional negative impacts associated with these uses. In terms of buffering, setbacks, or separation distances, those do not currently exist and are not necessarily feasible to provide. Again, since the uses have been operating in this way for a significant amount of time, staff do not believe these are required. And we do not believe that the expanded use is obnoxious by virtue of noise, odor, dust, vibration, smoke, or other emissions. We've not enabled any additional expansion of these uses on the property, just given how overdeveloped these properties currently are, so no expansion is permitted. And in terms of our general criteria, I'll take you through those in a moment. In terms of our other policies in support of this proposal, we do find in section 2.5 related to economic development policies pertaining to tourism. And this one states that council shall permit a variety of opportunities for visitor-oriented businesses in locations and at a scale consistent with the intent of the zones enabled within our various designations. So this is in the shoreland zone. Shoreland zone, especially along the coasts, do tend to be characterized by this type of development where we have seen cottages on fairly small lots having been developed, primarily with tourism and seasonal dwelling in mind. So I would say this is consistent, the proposal is consistent with this policy. And council shall also encourage and promote opportunities for visitor-oriented business in the municipalities. It's our understanding that these currently are rented as tourist commercial uses, and so we would, it is staff's opinion that this policy is maintained as well. In terms of our general criteria, council is meant to be satisfied that the proposal is in keeping with the MPS, and staff are confident that this is the case, and we are also confident that it is not in conflict with any municipal, provincial programs or bylaws or any other regulations, and also that the proposal is not premature or inappropriate due to costs related to the proposal. Staff do not expect any additional costs for the municipality as a result of this proposal. Land use compatibility, again, as the uses are long-standing uses, staff do not anticipate any issues with land use compatibility. The creation of any excessive traffic hazards or congestion due to road or pedestrian network adequacy within, adjacent to, and leading to the proposal. Staff do not believe this will generate any additional traffic over and above what has already been experienced, given the uses existing. The adequacy of fire protection, staff have consulted with the local fire chief and are confident that service can be provided to this area. We don't believe there's any potential for pollution or flooding, given no new construction is being proposed. And the suitability of the site. So we are confident that the site is suitable for development, given it is developed already. So in terms of the summary of our development agreement, the development agreement permits either 2 tourist cabins or 2 one-unit dwellings or a combination thereof on the subject properties. It permits the subject properties to be consolidated into one property, but that is not required. And it also permits the rebuilding of the uses, provided any new, if should the buildings be destroyed and are rebuilt, the requirements of the land use bylaw shall be met at that time. In terms of our process, letters were sent to 34 neighboring property owners. Similar to our last application, we did not hold a public information meeting because no new uses were being proposed. Anyone that was notified of this application will be notified again of a public hearing. And our recommendation reads that Planning Advisory Committee recommends that council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit the existing tourist cabins at 3278 and 3280 Long Point Road, PIDs 5509, 5160, and 5509-4145 in Harbourville, which is substantively the same, save for minor differences in form, as the draft set out in Appendix D of the report dated August 8th, 2023. And I'll pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mosier. Are there any questions of clarification from the committee? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you. I guess I was pressing the wrong button. Thank you. Yes, so I have a few questions of clarification. First one is, if I understand correctly, the 2 buildings were there since the 50s, but the deck was the expansion recently that connects the 2 buildings together, and that was done without a permit from the municipality before it was done? Or
through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, yes, the deck was constructed fairly recently.
Okay. The fire marshal had no issue with the deck being all wooden. The fact that it links the 2 buildings now, does the fire hazard to the buildings become increased? One catches on fire, it rapidly spreads to the other, or they were so close anyways that it's not so much a
Through you,
risk?
Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, the fire chief didn't comment directly on that, but yes, I imagine that because the cottages are so close together, the deck is not making any categorical difference one way or another in that regard.
Okay. And from the presentation we just saw before, the deck was part of the planning building envelope for the other one. Now that the two buildings are linked with the deck, does that make them one dwelling under our regulations? Because the planning advisory, or the recommendation is 2 cabins. So I'm a little confused as, do they still remain independent, or they become linked as one under our definitions?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, there's still 2 dwellings. They are connected by the deck, but the deck itself is not structural in nature, so it doesn't then render it a 2-unit dwelling. It's still 2 1-unit dwellings or 2 tourist cabins.
Okay, and so if they are destroyed and have to reconstruct by the existing bylaws, it can't be reconstructed as one dwelling that has that footprint of the 2 cabins with the deck? Or that's unknown?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, because the footprint currently extends beyond the lot lines, the footprint would immediately come into the inside of the lot lines. So maybe I missed the tail end of your question, but...
Well, I guess because everything is non-conforming on this one. They're surpassing the lots in all kinds of ways. So if there was a fire and they go up in flame and they want to rebuild, they would be allowed to rebuild, but under the existing bylaw now, which means everything would have to be compacted.
That's correct, yes.
But they're 2 separate properties at this time.
Currently, however, the development agreement does permit the owner to consolidate them into 1 lot.
Okay, which would change the boundaries, I guess, of what.
It would only remove the interior lot line.
Okay, thank you. And just one last question. When in the report, you didn't mention this in the meeting, but in the development agreement, there was something mentioning about the sewers and the water that don't, it says in the agreement, they don't already exist, and do they what have they been doing for 70 years of getting access to water? Will they have to build sewage and water, or it continues whichever way it's continuing now?
Through you, Ms. Gagnon, through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, my apologies. So currently the site is serviced with a well, and it has a holding tank for both of the units. These 2 matters fall under provincial jurisdiction, so I believe the development agreement states that the owner is responsible for providing those services. It does not make mention of whether or not the services are currently existing, but they are existing, but it is up to the owner to ensure that all of the requirements of the authority having jurisdiction for those 2 matters, which is the Provincial Department of Environment and Climate Change, that all of their regulations are met. That's what that line in the DA says.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. No more question.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is centered around the non-conforming use status. So, as I understand, if this development agreement wasn't being considered and these properties were destroyed by fire and were to be rebuilt with their non-conforming status, is it correct that there could be a development agreement at that time allowing them to be rebuilt as they were? Like, could they be rebuilt exactly the buildings they are with a development agreement if it were not prohibited in this proposed development agreement?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Morse. Trish may have something to add, but the short answer would be no, I don't believe so. Typically what we try to do, well, it would be different if these dwellings were not extending into the right-of-way. If they were a non-conforming use with a non-conforming structure similar to the one we just looked at, we could contemplate them to be rebuilt as they are, but given that they are extending beyond the lot lines, it would not be something I would professionally be very comfortable with.
Thank you. To follow up to that, I guess my concern arises if we say that if they're destroyed and need to be rebuilt, they must conform with all the requirements of the zone. Being inside the lot lines, I think, is one thing, but then having to require to comply with all of the requirements of the zone and the setbacks, it might not be possible to even build anything. So I just find that might be a bit, I don't want to get into debate, but thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to provide the committee with the setback requirements. In the T1 zone, the required front yard setback is 20 feet. The side setback is only 4 feet, so on either side it's only 4 feet, and then the rear setback is 20 feet. So it could be challenging. It's not to say it's impossible. Currently, these dwellings are 1 story. They could go up to 2, or I mean, these are all hypothetical discussions, but should the 2 cottages burn, 1 cottage maybe is what gets, maybe only 1 cottage replaces the 2. They are quite small. They are very much intended for tourist use, with the idea being that you probably aren't spending much time inside anyways on vacation. So that would really ultimately be up to the owner to sort out, should that ever happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or clarification of staff? No? Oh, sorry. You're quick on that. Ms. Friars?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess a question around consolidation of the properties. Is there an option that could change the current non-conforming nature of the development if the properties were consolidated and at this time, and then allow for a consolidated, or let me say, refer to it as a connected building with 2 options for living, as opposed to going into a non-conforming, or approving a non-conforming situation. The other question I have is also around zoning. Again, we've talked about hypotheticals of the buildings being lost for whatever reason. The nature of utilizing a consolidated property at that time for the building of a larger property for maybe residential purposes or Airbnb or whatever, does that zone permit that kind of use in that location? Primarily residential, but with potential for tourist accommodation.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Friars, can we just take one of these questions
Sure.
at a time? Because
Let's
now
talk
I've
about-
forgotten both questions.
Consolidation at this stage of the game, does consolidation of the 2 lots make the current situation conforming, I guess is the easiest way to put it, as opposed to approving a non-conforming use?
No, I don't believe it. So there's 2 non-conforming statuses here. So there's the non-conforming use and the
Right.
non-conforming structure. So this does legalize the use through a development agreement. We've said this use is permitted on this property.
Okay.
The non-conforming structure is not solved by this development agreement, which goes to Mr. Morse's question of, could we have approved a DA that would have permitted them to be rebuilt as is? That would somewhat take away their non-conforming structure status, but we've not taken that away. I think you asked about whether or not a 2-unit could be constructed on one or both of these. If the property were consolidated, I think you asked, could a 2-unit be constructed? And the answer to that is yes. At that point, we would either look to discharge the agreement, or if the agreement does state that we've retained the underlying zoning, then a 2-unit cottage could be built, because that is a permitted use in the zone.
Okay, and I guess further to that would be the question of the tourist zone application there. Is it T?
That's the tidal zone.
Tidal zone, okay. So tidal zone, does that look at the use being right now primarily for tourist purposes, if it was, if the property was consolidated and used for residential, year-round residential purposes, does that fit that site
Through
in a
you, Madam.
consolidated way?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Friars, that's also a permitted use in the zone.
Okay.
So what this development agreement seeks to do a few things. It legalizes the use. The use is not normally permitted in this zone, and it provides the ability to rebuild and to operate as that use, even though it's a non-conforming structure.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Varek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I would just share as well, having the non-conforming status on a property is cumbersome for a property owner, especially in a commercial venture property like a tourist cabin, which we know this property has been doing for 70 years. The MGA, so the Municipal Government Act, it sets out what can and can't happen on those properties once it's got that non-conforming status. The MGA is not as friendly to non-conforming commercial uses as it is residential when it comes to rebuilding should a fire happen. So to Ms. Mosier's point, this is very it has the advantage for the property owner that they're not dealing with this in a catastrophic time frame. So fire happens, they come to us, we want to rebuild, can't rebuild, we've got to have a DA. So now they've got this whole time delay that we also are part of, but it causes property owners a lot of issues, and even insurance issues can occur. So it takes a lot of the barriers away. One thing to keep in mind too, these are extremely small lots. What was it, combined they're 4,000 square feet. This zone typically, and environment typically, we both require 30,000 per lot per use. They have other issues regardless if this fire does occur.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of clarification? No? I'll just read the recommendation again, even though it's long. The Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit the existing tourist cabins at 3278 and 3280 Long Point Road, PID 5509-5160 and 5509-4145 Harbourville, which is substantively the same for minor differences in form as the draft set out in Appendix D of the report dated August 8, 2023. Can I have a mover, please? Ms. Gagnon? Councillor Allen, thank you. Is there any debate? I'll call the question. You can register your votes now, please. And that is passed. Thank you very much. Item C, application to discharge an existing development agreement and enter into a new development agreement at 1165 Black River Road. And that belongs to Ms. Mosier as well. So your light is on, it's all yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully we don't have black livers. We are here to, again, look at a development agreement from Big Falls Fishery. And if you haven't caught on to the theme of our meeting this afternoon, it is our shoreland designation. So we are on Black River Lake at this point at 1287 Black River Road, PID 55184865. And this is for our existing fish farm, Big Falls Fishery. So the proposal is to discharge our existing development agreement and enter into a new agreement. This is in part for greater flexibility. We'll talk about that in our background slide, but for the moment, we'll just look at our location. So we are in Black River, on Black River Lake in the southeast portion of the municipality, and this application covers 4 part PIDs. PID 55490197, 55479463, 55473029, and 55473060. Don't worry, I didn't put the PIDs in the motion, Councillor Armstrong. In terms of our aerial photo, we can see this is Black River Lake. The lake is at the bottom of your screen. The fish farm has public road frontage on Black River Road, and you can see some of the infrastructure they've got here. So this fish farm raises fish from eggs to smolts to a certain age, size, and then they are transported to a different fish farm to get up to commercial weights. This is a flow-through system, so the way this works is the fish farm draws water from the lake, it uses it in its operations, it flows through their system with all the little baby fish, and then when the water has reached the end of their system, it's filtered and released back into there's a water course that sort of runs up here. You can't see it through the trees, and is released. Ultimately, it ends up in Lumsden's Dam. One thing of note is that fish farms do fall under the jurisdiction of the Provincial Departments of Oceans and Fisheries. So all of the licensing, restrictions, monitoring, water quality falls to that provincial department. That's another reason why, actually, hold on, sorry. That's a closer look at the fish farm. So you can see staff had the benefit of touring this a few years ago. So this is an office building. They store their supplies, run their office out of there. This is where the little fish eggs start out in little tanks, and then they gradually move through these tanks as they grow. At some point in the process, they are vaccinated. That's an interesting operation if you ever hear how that happens. And then when the water is finished, there's a drum filter here that filters out the water, and then it's discharged and flows up through Lumsden's Dam. So by way of application or background, the application was triggered when Big Falls applied for a permit to install a new oxygenation tank in a location that was not contemplated under the existing agreement. Our existing agreement was very prescriptive in terms of the site plan and how the fish farm could be laid out or operated in that way. And so, and it also did require some monitoring requirements that, again, not being the jurisdiction, having authority over fish farms was not useful to our staff and was not useful to ensuring water quality, given that this is already the responsibility of a provincial department. So staff suggested that we discharge this agreement, bring it into our new regulations, our new policies, and enter into a new agreement that would provide them the flexibility that they need and remove areas of responsibility out of the municipality's hands where we are not the authorities. This is the current site plan. As you can see, the entire operation is laid out in the site plan, and the way this would normally occur under the existing development agreement is, you know, if they had come to apply for something different than this, we would not be able to issue the permit. So this was the rationale for discharging and entering into a new agreement. So in terms of the site information, our subject property is made up of portions of 4 different PIDs. All are currently owned by Nova Scotia Power and are leased by Big Falls Fishery. The subject property, or the leased area for this operation, is roughly 6 acres in area. It is located on Black River Lake. So as I described before, the fish farm intakes water from the lake. The water circulates through the hatchery and is filtered and discharged to the north towards Lumsden Dam. And this is regulated by the Provincial Department of Fisheries and Oceans through licensing. This is our zoning map. We can see that this property is located entirely, again, within the S1 or Lakeshore Residential Zone. This is not a use that's currently permitted in the zone, but it is an existing use. So when we think about properties like that, we tend to call them unique lots. Those lots created before 1979 that have features that limit their development potential for uses permitted in the assigned designation and zone. The boundaries of a unique lot may have been altered by addition or consolidation after 1979, but still have features that limit their development potential. So the current fish farm on the property would significantly limit the development potential of this property for, say, a cottage. So we are considering it a unique lot. And unique lots have some status under the MPS in that we can consider uses that are not permitted in the zone. Policy 2.97 says that council shall consider only by development agreement within all designations and zones proposals for the reuse of unique structures, unique lots, and historic places and structures that do not meet the requirements of the land use bylaw. In evaluating such development agreements, council shall be satisfied that the proposal includes a unique structure, a unique lot, or a historic place, and staff are of the opinion that this is considered a unique lot, and that the proposal is in keeping with the intent of the designation in which it is located. So the intent of the shoreline designation is to support development along our lake shores, generally residential in nature, although this use does require the proximity of a freshwater body of water. So we would suggest that this is in keeping with the zone and the designation. Similarly, we're meant to, if the use is a listed permitted use, we're meant to address those conditions that prevent the proposal from being permitted. So again, this is not a permitted use, so we have limited that in the development agreement, and we are meant to look at our general criteria. So our general criteria states that council shall be satisfied that the proposal is in keeping with the intent of the MPS, and staff are of the opinion that that is the case, and that it's not in conflict with any programs, bylaws, or regulations at a municipal or provincial level, and staff are confident that that is the case as well. Meant to look into the adequacy of fire protection, and the Wolfville and Greenwich fire departments have both indicated that they provide coverage to this area. And pollution, we're meant to ensure that there will be no pollution resulting from the use through soil erosion or siltation of water courses. Staff do not believe that will be the case since this has been operating for some time and we've not experienced any pollution or negative impacts on lake water quality. And we are confident that the site is suitable for this use in terms of grades, soils, geological conditions, and other considerations. So the summary of our development agreement, it removes water monitoring and the submission of results to the municipality. It enables the expansion within the leased area, which is essentially what the previous development agreement permitted, and it requires a 20-foot front yard setback, which was also required under the existing development agreement. In terms of our process, we are at Planning Advisory Committee. We did send 8 letters to property owners within 500 feet. We did not hold a PIM on this one as well, given there is no new use proposed. And with that, I'll pass it back to the chair for our recommendation, which reads, the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council discharge the existing development agreement dated February 10th, 2011, and give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit an expansion to the fish farm at 1165 Black River Road, which is substantially the same, save for minor differences in form, as the draft set out in Appendix C of the report dated August 8th, 2023.
Thank you. Are there any questions of clarification? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions. First one, just to clarify, the development agreement is binding to the property owner and not the leasee or the person that's actually operating the fish farm. So the compliance to the development agreement is the onus of Nova Scotia Power?
The development agreement travels with the land, and the onus for being in compliance with the development agreement is with the landowner.
Okay.
But should that landowner change, the old landowner has no more responsibilities under the development agreement. They transfer entirely to a new landowner. If you have a development agreement.
Yes.
And you sell me your property.
Yes.
I'm then required to ensure that all of the terms of that development agreement are met. You no longer have any responsibility because you have sold me your property along with the development agreement.
Okay, and so if I lease my land, I'm still responsible for
Correct.
anything happening? Okay, in terms of the existing requirements under the development agreement that is in existence, and all these monitoring requirements and that you mentioned that you want removed, were they by any chance put there in order to protect, I guess, the local environment or make sure the fish farm had as limited impact as possible in case the provincial regulations change and become weaker than what they are? Do we risk here removing those segments of that development agreement? And if things decrease in terms of protection, that we would be left with a legal void there for maintaining a standard of protection for the operation?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, I don't believe that's the case. I believe that it would be the authority having jurisdiction that would and should have the more stringent of requirements, and they should be the ones responsible for enforcing those requirements.
Okay, so these requirements that are in the existing development agreement, at the end of the day, they were not enforceable by the municipality, even with them being there?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, no, I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Frye, oh, sorry, Mr. Varric.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the old DA that we're looking to discharge spoke of reporting to us. So there was never any obligation for us to enforce. So it just added an extra step that wasn't achieving anything. It was adding paperwork.
Thank you. Any further questions or clarification? Ms. Mosier's already read the motion into the record, so can I have a mover, please? Councillor Allen and Mr. Morris, thank you. Is there any debate on this? No? I'll call the question. You can register your vote now. And that is passed. Thank you. And the last one that we have today is land use bylaw text amendments to permit accessory dwellings in growth center residential zones. And Ms. Mosier, you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we'll come back from the beach and we'll go back into our neighborhoods, and we're going to talk about accessory dwellings within our growth centers. So the origin for this application, this is a council application. It comes out of a motion at a special council meeting from January 18th, 2022, and that motion read that municipal council instruct the CAO to have municipal staff prepare the following amendments to the municipal planning documents in accordance with the Municipal Government Act, and in bold we see the enabling of accessory dwellings within growth centers. So we are going to discuss that today. We may come back with those. Well, we did take care of one other part of that motion already. So accessory dwellings. What is an accessory dwelling? So an accessory dwelling is an additional unit on the same lot as the main unit, including but not limited to secondary suites. So some of you may be familiar with those. Those are limited in size in accordance with the National Building Code, and they are regulated through the location within the dwelling and may also control the outward appearance of that second unit. We also have granny or garden flats, as they're known colloquially, and this is in a separate building, but on the same lot. So they can have a lot of different additional characteristics and configurations. We'll go through some of these now. So the first one would be an interior upper level or an interior lower level unit. So we can see those would be in the areas on the photos shaded in red. So on the top right, you could see a separate unit on the upper floor of that two-story dwelling. And in the lower right photo, you could see a unit in the basement of that one-story dwelling. They can be attached side by side. So again, this one has been added on to the main house through an addition. or it can be above a garage but attached to the house. So this one has been attached on the side of this house above the garage. Could involve a garage conversion. So in either of those garages, you could in theory put a unit. Or, as we're discussing today, a detached. So under our current land use bylaw, all of the options presented up until this slide are currently permitted, provided a 2-unit dwelling is permitted, and even a secondary suite, provided it's limited in size, is permitted within our R1 zone as well. But what we don't currently permit is what is shown on the screen above. So a detached garage conversion or a purpose-built accessory dwelling, as can be seen in the photo below, on top of a garage. So what are some of the benefits of accessory dwellings? The first would be better service delivery through gentle increase in density. So that would be the provision of water and sewer services. If you increase the density in a given area, you have more ratepayers paying the same bill. We would see an increase in our housing supply, which is desperately needed in our current housing crisis. We would see greater assessment per acre, so that would be the total number of tax dollars collected per acre of land. Again, similar to our infrastructure consideration, if you have more ratepayers paying the same bill, things get cheaper for everyone. However, in this regard, more dwellings means more assessed value and more tax dollars for the municipality to provide the services that we as residents so greatly appreciate. Increased housing affordability through an increased supply. So the law of supply and demand states that when supply is low and demand is high, as is our current condition, prices will rise. If supply is high, regardless of demand, prices generally will fall. There's opportunities for downsizing or aging in place. So I can tell you myself, I've fielded several inquiries from folks looking to construct accessory dwellings. And one thing that comes up over and over and over again is aging parents looking to downsize and looking to live on the same property as their children, but maybe not in the same house. And we also see the protection of farmland, which might sound like a little bit of a strange addition, but if we take care of the demand for housing within our growth centers, it reduces the demand for housing outside our growth centers, thereby protecting more farmland than we might otherwise see. So let's look at some of these in a bit closer. So on your screen, you'll see a depiction of an existing neighborhood in the municipality. Anyone who can guess where that is will get bonus points. And so when we see increased housing supply and better service delivery, so the thing that jumps out at me with this image is that all 3 streets are roughly the same length. But not all 3 streets have the same number of units. So our top, sort of the street that's very straight, this has 21 units along it. The middle one has 24 units, and the one on the right has 21 units. So they're all paying the same bill for infrastructure. In theory, if we charged for infrastructure on a street-by-street basis, the folks in the middle would have the lowest tax bill, because they're sharing that bill amongst 23 other households. Whereas this one, you're only sharing with 17 other households, and on this one, you're only sharing with 20. Greater assessment per acre. So if we take 1 acre here, we have significantly more houses than here. So we're getting more tax bills with higher values. Now, if we had accessory dwellings, where all the red dots are, suddenly we've added more people to help pay those infrastructure bills. We've added more assessment value, and we've added more housing. So one thing that comes up quite a lot when we do our presentations is density. And we don't often take you through what density means and what density looks like. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about density. So we've talked about these 3 streets. The street in red, I've said, has 21 units. It currently occupies over 13.5 acres. So it has a residential density of 1.54 units per acre. Pretty low. In blue, where we have our 20 or 18 units, I'm sorry, I got those mixed up. There's 21 in red and 18 in the blue. The blue area occupies 5 acres and results in a density of 3.6 units per acre. And our middle street, any guesses on whether our middle street is higher or lower density than our blue street? No? Okay. So red is 1.54 units per acre. The blue is 3.6 units per acre. Our orange one, the one that maybe looks the highest density, is just under 8 acres and has 24 units and results in 3 units per acre. So our orange street is actually lower density than our blue street. The reason for this is the houses along the orange street are bigger. So they do occupy more land, but they don't result in greater density. So you might say, but Laura, that's just one little neighborhood in New Minas. Surely that can't be the trend for the whole county. Well, we looked into that too, and we looked at the average lot size in R1 and R2. Our current permitted density under, well, not current, our old permitted density in R1 and R2, they were lower density zones than our current R1 and R2. So the density in our old R1 permitted 7.26 units per acre. And I'm sorry, I've missed some numbers here. Please disregard that 10.89. Sorry. Yes, so the permitted density in R1 was 7.26. Under our current bylaw, it's 10.89 in R1. In our old bylaw, R2 permitted 14.52 or 10. I can't remember. I'm so sorry. This was supposed to be a great slide, and I put the numbers in the wrong spots. Current R2 permits 21.78 units per acre, and our current R1 permits roughly 10.5 units per acre. But our current as-built density is 2.4 units per acre in R1 compared to 10, and in R2 it's even worse, it's 1.7 compared to 21. So all this to say is there is room to grow within our existing residential neighborhoods. We have significant opportunities for intensification and to increase the efficiency of our service provision, provide more housing, and generate more tax dollars. And given the very, very low as-built densities, we wouldn't even notice it. So when we look at our residential designation, well, 4 of our 5 residential zones, our R1 zone and our R2 zone only permit 1 dwelling per lot. So whether that dwelling has 1 unit or 2 units, you only get 1 per lot. The R1 and R2 zone constitute 61% of our residential land area. What this means is if you were building a house, you would only use 39% of your tools. You have all the tools you need, but you only use 39 of them. It's not the most efficient way to go about building a house. And it wouldn't be the most efficient way for us to solve our housing crisis if we did not utilize our R1 and R2 lands for additional intensification. So we're back at our neighborhood. We've shaded, so one thing that we see, and one reason why our as-built density in R2 is so much lower than R1 is due to lots on our left-hand street there. We've shaded the rear yards of these lots in brown just to show the extent of the land available for residential development that cannot currently be utilized due to a lack of road frontage. So we require 40 feet of road frontage and 4,000 square feet for an R2 lot. There's nothing to say that someone built a lot with 40 feet of road frontage and a depth of 300 feet. So significantly larger. That land is there, it's zoned for development, but it cannot be developed under our current regulations because it doesn't have enough road frontage to subdivide. So all of these lands are underutilized, and through these amendments, we're hoping to have better utilization of these resources. So again, you're saying, oh, maybe that's just that one little pocket of New Minas. It's not. We did maps for every growth center, and you can see, well, it's hard to see, but these areas in yellow are our R2 areas. The orange areas within the yellow areas are an indication of the underutilization of lots. Let's go to a different growth center. So this is North Kentville. You can see there are significant amounts of underutilized lands within our current R2 zoning. And just for reference, this does not represent vacant lots. All of these lots currently have one dwelling on them, and they are underutilized as a result of the vacant land. And for the most part, these lands are all serviced by municipal or village sewer and or water infrastructure. Within Hants border, we see a similar pattern. And again, in Canning, we see a similar pattern. I tried to hit all of the councillors on committee. When we go to our policy, so this is, the meat and potatoes of it all, we want to make sure that these amendments fit in with our policies. I'm sorry I missed Kingston, Councillor Armstrong. Kingston didn't have that much. Kingston's doing great in that regard. So in terms of our vision statement within the MPS for settlement, Council is looking to concentrate new commercial and residential development in the growth center, so that's the topic of our presentation today. Encourage efficient service and infrastructure delivery, and enable and encourage a diversity of housing throughout the region. We're meant to identify and continue to protect agricultural land. That becomes increasingly difficult if we don't use the resources at our disposal in our current residential designation. Again, in rural and natural areas, we're meant to retain the rural character of all areas other than the growth centers. That becomes a lot easier when we're able to provide the housing that people need within our growth centers instead of outside. Transportation, to make walking, cycling, and public transit transportation options viable alternatives to the car, and develop safe and active transportation networks within and between growth centers and along key transportation corridors to better connect outlying areas. So if we make our communities more dense, what that means is we are putting more people into smaller areas. All of those people need goods and services. They need to go to the grocery store. They need to go to the pharmacy. They need to go to the hardware store and wherever else they need to go in their daily travels. If there are more people in smaller areas, the market will ultimately provide those uses, more of those uses closer to where people live. So perhaps if the communities of Cambridge and Waterville had greater residential populations, there would be merit and demand for an additional grocery store, for example. All of a sudden, people living in Cambridge can walk to the grocery store, they can ride their bike to the grocery store, but currently today, if you live in Cambridge and you want to ride your bike to the grocery store, you're looking at a very long ride. Economic development. To support innovative areas for economic growth and sustain a blend of traditional and non-traditional sectors. So again, innovation can come from increased population, and economic growth as well is generated through increased population. Healthy communities to create and sustain an urban and rural environment that fosters active lifestyles and healthy living. That again speaks to active transportation, and to encourage housing that is healthy, affordable, sustainable, adequate, appropriate, safe, and accessible. And this would increase our housing options. Arts and culture, and you might think this isn't relevant, but we'll get into that. Support programs, public spaces, and infrastructure that foster lifelong learning, active living, creativity, and artistry, and to encourage social diversity and respect by supporting the unique characteristics and preferences of all people and by upholding the rights of all individuals to actively participate in creating a shared future. So we mention here public spaces and infrastructure, so as well as active living. And again, similar to the previous description of increased demand for commercial uses, if we plan our spaces for people and we have a critical mass of people in a given area, we can create vibrant public spaces where people want to be. And similarly, social diversity and respect. As I've said, I have fielded several inquiries from people looking to live in an accessory dwelling on a property that currently exists, whether owned by family or otherwise. And so we would see additional social diversity, and we would be supporting the preferences of those folks that would look to live in an accessory dwelling. Within our growth centers, we also find objectives and policies to support this. Within our settlement and economic development themes for this, it's to provide a wide range of urban development and business opportunities supported by cost-effective municipal services. Again, more people equals more business opportunities and more effective and efficient municipal services, provided they're in a smallish area. Agriculture in rural and natural areas, to protect agricultural land and rural character by directing development to clearly defined growth centers. So again, by increasing the ability to build denser within growth centers, we reduce the demand for housing in rural areas. Under transportation, to support the development of compact, complete communities with accessible and active transportation options. So again, compact would be an increase in density, and complete would include all of those uses that people want to access on a regular basis, which can only be supported by a critical mass of people. And then arts and culture, to preserve historic centers and the traditional urban-rural blend of the region. So if we provide the demand for housing elsewhere, then there are fewer people that are looking to build on Main Street Kingston or Main Street Canning, where we do see our historic centers. And we do reduce, again, the demand for housing within the rural areas, thereby maintaining a lower density of development. Within our residential designation, we're meant to accommodate a wide range of housing options, including opportunities for mixed uses and increased densities in all areas where urban services are efficient to deliver. I think after running the numbers, I would hope we can all agree that increased densities are not currently being provided within our growth centers, and we should seek to increase those even further. In our rural and natural areas, to discourage urban developments in rural areas by providing a variety of development opportunities within growth centers. I think this would assist in relieving some demand for development within rural areas. I do get a fairly significant number of inquiries on a monthly basis to build higher density uses in rural areas, which to me says there are not enough opportunities within our growth centers for those uses, and we should be looking to accommodate more of them. Under the theme of healthy communities, to provide a wide range of housing choices, including affordable housing. And then when we look to our residential 1 unit and residential 1 and 2 unit, these are the zones that will undergo the most change under this proposal. We see that the lands in these zones are located, are intended to maintain existing residential areas while encouraging energy efficiency and providing opportunities for infill development. So these accessory dwellings would be considered infill development within our growth centers. They're occurring on existing lots on available land that are already developed. So the summary of the amendments. We would permit accessory dwellings within all residential zones and within the mixed commercial residential zone. So that is a mixed-use zone that permits a broad range of residential uses up to apartments having 16 units, as well as neighborhood commercial uses. So all of the accessory dwellings are subject to the requirements of accessory buildings in the zone in which they're located. For the most part in our residential zones, that means they would have a maximum height of 20 feet. They would have minimum setbacks of 4 feet from all lot lines unless the entrance to the unit is in the side or rear yard setback, in which case a 10-foot setback would be required. And in terms of the underutilized land within the R2 zone, we have proposed permitting grouped dwellings subject to the requirements for group dwellings in R3, which are the same as for a main dwelling in the R2. So it would require 4-foot side yard setbacks, 20-foot front, and 20-foot rear yard setbacks. And all of these would be subject to the lot area requirements. So in our R1, R2, and R3 zone, you're required to have 2,000 square feet of lot area per unit. You would still be required to have that lot area for the accessory dwelling. In our R4 zone, we require 1,800 square feet per unit, and that would also stay the same. And with that, I'll pass it back to the chair. First, I'll read the recommendation. The Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding amendments to the land use bylaw to permit the development of accessory dwellings in growth centers, which are substantively the same, save for minor differences in form as the draft set out in Appendix C of the report dated August 8th, 2023. I pass it back to the chair.
Questions or clarification? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several, please. Okay, first one. All these this amendment would apply only to everything that is a residential zoning. So our nature, the forestry zoning, the agriculture zoning, these other zonings, this would not apply to all those areas. This would only apply to R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, and because I do know in the amendments it mentions tidal and shoreline, so I just want to make sure like what is affected.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, this only applies to residential zones and the mixed commercial residential zone. All of these are located in growth centers. The agricultural and resource zone are not enabled in growth centers, so this is not permitted in those zones.
Okay, right. Only in growth centers. Thank you. The other question is how, so this is mostly like a separate building, but in the ones where the accessory dwelling is attached to the building itself, is it separate? Is it written in there like a separate entrance that you can't? So for example, if I'm at the bottom level and there's a dwelling on the top level, they have to be separated, that you can't access both? Is that part of the requirements when these are approved as accessory dwellings, is that you can't connect?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, we already permit that type of development within zones that permit 2 units. We don't have a whole lot of restrictions on where the access is or how it's accessed. We already permit those. Those are not a subject of the amendments today.
Right, okay. I was just trying to clarify if it sort of becomes, so I guess I'll ask it different. Does it become a separate address? So if I have a house and I build a separate accessory building for my parents to live in, do they end up with a second address, 2 address on that same street? Or do they stay to 1 address, postal code, all that? Like?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, they would definitely have the same postal code, but they would get a separate civic in accordance with our civic numbering bylaw.
So they would get a separate civic address. And does that change how property taxes are then collected? Is it the owner of the property that pays the taxes, or is it the 2 civic addresses that pay the taxes and calculate separately?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, so tax bills are based on the property itself, so it would be issued 1 tax bill, and it would be up to the owners. Well, I mean, it would be the responsibility of the property owner to pay, but how much or any of that tax that gets passed on to their potential tenant that would be governed under the Residential Tenancies Act, if at all.
Okay, so then the property taxing system stays to the property owner regardless of if they have an accessory building with a separate address?
Yes,
or not?
that's correct.
Okay. And in the document that you sent that specifies the Appendix C draft amendments, I was a little confused, and so I'm just wanting clarification on the 14.32 multiple main buildings. So it says delete that section and replace with, so just, we're talking accessory dwellings. Why do we need to replace multiple main building dwellings? I don't see what change in there. How does this affect the accessory buildings?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, we need that amendment to permit grouped dwellings in the R2 zone. Grouped dwellings would consist of multiple main dwellings. So it would enable property owners within R2 to construct a second main dwelling, not an accessory dwelling. So the main dwelling would be subject to the main building requirements of the R2 zone, so increased setbacks, but you wouldn't be limited to just the one.
So it wouldn't be an accessory dwelling?
No, it would not.
Okay, so we're asking to amend for accessory dwellings and main dwellings in the residential 2 zone.
As staff processed this application, it became clear that there were significant numbers of lots within the R2 zone. The average lot area of the R2 zone is about 30,000 square feet. That's the average lot size across the county in the R2 zone, and that's only properties already having a civic number. So it was staff's opinion that one additional dwelling on properties within growth centers that benefit from sewer servicing at a minimum accessory dwellings just didn't go far enough in terms of enabling some actual change in terms of our housing stock. There would continue to be significant underutilization of R2 lands if only accessory dwellings were permitted.
Okay, so how are main buildings different than accessory buildings in terms, so I'm getting it's probably the setbacks, but how different would that look if you can visualize, because I have your little picture of the house with the other house next to it, so I'm trying to see the group dwellings. How different is that from the multiple, like the R3? R3 has commercial right in it, but I'm trying to visualize how different this is by permitting multiple main buildings.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon. So the R3 zone currently permits grouped dwellings. The difference, so you had a few questions in there.
Yeah.
The difference between a main dwelling and an accessory dwelling is partly the setbacks. So in the R2 zone, main dwellings are required to have a 20-foot front yard setback, a 20-foot rear yard setback, and 4-foot side yard setbacks.
Okay.
Accessory buildings are required to have, and main dwellings have a maximum building height of 35 feet. Accessory dwellings have a maximum height of 20 feet, but they are permitted to be located 4 feet from a side or rear lot line. So they can be closer than a main dwelling, and they have to be shorter than a main dwelling.
So permitting multiple main buildings would mean bigger buildings, further distance from lot lines, but bigger buildings, but they can be close to one another, the big buildings. The setback is from the lot line,
National
not
Building
from
Code
other
will
buildings.
regulate how close the buildings can be to each other,
Okay.
but our bylaw would regulate how close they can be to lot lines.
Okay, and so they would be bigger buildings, and so this would permit that in the R2 zoning, because it's already there in the R3 zoning.
And R4.
So it would change the R2 zoning, so everywhere there's R2 zoning, not only would people be allowed an accessory building that is smaller, but there would also be the availability of bigger buildings.
Provided they have the required lot area.
Which, from what you say, seems to be the case. Sorry.
Absolutely.
So they would have the lot area, so we would be looking at not just a house with a smaller building, but it could be multiple buildings in the R2 zone as well.
Yes,
Right.
and the rationale behind that is, I mean, if I go back to our slides.
Well, I know you're trying to densify it. If you don't find that's okay.
So when I look at these lots, I mean, if they had additional frontage, and even potentially on these lots, there would be nothing stopping a developer from going through the subdivision process and creating a public road, and then they could create additional lots. They could achieve the same density, but subdivision is a lengthy process, it's a costly process, and it does serve as a barrier to additional development on these R2 lots that are very, very large in terms of their used area within a serviced area. They absolutely represent, from my professional opinion, an underutilization of serviced land, and are ultimately, in some ways, doing the municipality a disservice because they are not efficient to operate or maintain. And enabling grouped dwellings on these properties reduces the cost of entry for some of our smaller scale developers, or even regular everyday homeowners, to participate in the development market and enable us to utilize our resources in a much better, more efficient way to achieve the objectives that our NPS has outlined.
Okay, that's all fine. I'm just trying to visualize that essentially in an R2, like how many accessory dwellings does the change in amendment would permit? For R1, it would just be one accessory dwelling. For R2, they could have one accessory dwelling or multiple main buildings, or they could have several accessory dwellings in one main building. I'm trying to visualize how different my neighborhood would look if I have just one accessory dwelling permitted, and so it's just an extra, or if it's like boom, 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 multiple buildings.
Well, I mean, in terms of if this were your neighborhood and you were driving along this road and this individual had built 2 or 3 additional houses beyond his house from the street, you might never know because they're tucked in behind where you wouldn't see it from the street. But at the same time, that owner has tapped into some of the benefits that we've outlined in this proposal. It may just look like an extra driveway down the side of the property.
Okay, and so in terms of water and sewer, every new accessory building or the multiple main buildings that would now be permitted in R2 and R1, they would need to go through the same process of, do we have the water and sewer for all this, or do by default we've kind of know that we do have the water and sewage services for making this change across the county?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, our growth centers are in part defined by our serviced areas. So, but you will note in the land use bylaw, we do tend to provide 2 minimum lot area requirements. So the 2,000 square feet per unit is only for serviced land. The requirements on unserviced land is significantly higher. So we do know where our infrastructure is. It is primarily located in growth centers, and so anyone who is serviced at the time of permitting would need to go through and get the permits to connect, but the servicing is there.
Okay, so the services is there for access, for more people per square foot. It would be okay.
Well, our infrastructure was designed in part on the basis of what our zoning permits, and even under our old zoning, we permitted in R1 7.5 units per acre, and we're only using 2.5 worth of the infrastructure. Okay. So there's plenty of room in our infrastructure to accommodate this growth.
Okay. Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of clarification? No. Okay. I do have one. With setbacks, like if I was going to build another dwelling in my backyard, I'm not. But I have a very deep lot, so I would have to put a driveway in. So does that fall within like the setbacks and all of that thing? You know what I mean? Like zoning would dictate where that driveway could go and how close it would be to the property lines, correct?
No, zoning regulates the construction of structures and buildings. A driveway, provided it's entirely on your property, we don't regulate the location.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure I'm in favor of this, but, okay. Okay, any other questions of clarification, even on the dark side over here? No? Okay. So I'll read it one more time. The Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding amendments to the land use bylaw to permit the development of accessory dwellings in growth centers which are substantively the same, save for minor differences in form as draft set out in Appendix C of the report dated August 8, 2023. Do I have a mover? Mr. Morris? Ms. Friars, thank you. Is there any debate? Mr. Morris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I think this was an excellent initiative of council and that staff have done an excellent job gathering information. I think they've gone above and beyond with the amount of data that we were shown, and I think it's going to be a great change for our municipality.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you. I think we need to densify. I think it's good. I like the accessory dwelling. It was well done, well worked. I do want to caution on two things. One is not to overestimate the returns financially for the county, or if for the municipality. I'm just thinking if it's the property owner only that's get taxed, there'll be a limit there as to how much actually gets into the municipality, given that it's not a separate address and a new property owner, like two property owners. So just on that to keep in mind. And then the other aspect, which I will stress, is the ecosystem values of those lands that are not developed. I understand what Laura's mentioning of having thousands of acres per lot and that we're not capitalizing it in growth centers. But other than forest fires, where if you have too much vegetation close to housing, you have issues, that vegetation, if it is vegetated in all these lots, provides a lot of ecosystem values in terms of buffering for excessive rainfall, for heat effect, and those are all things that are coming and already are here. So we do have to consider, we need to densify our housing availability, but we need those green spaces as well within our growth centers in order to buffer from the changing climate. So just to keep a balance that it has a value in terms of protecting and minimizing the impact of all that impermeable structures that we end up putting in our growth centers. So we do have to find a balance there in that. So that's just what I wanted to put out there. So there's our caution.
Thank you. Ms. Friars?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just echo the support of my colleagues for the initiative. I agree that there is ways in which we can densify our growth centers that some may, on the surface, may be wary of visually, but I think it can be accommodated with the initiatives with these changes. I'll be curious to hear some of the feedback from the public hearing in terms of how the public may perceive this will affect them, but I think there are ways in which we, and the municipality can really help to mitigate some of those concerns, and as we hear from the public around some of these issues. I hope the municipality also looks at affordable housing, and maybe a little bit off topic, but affordable housing in different ways. I think this is a great first step, but I think there are some other things that we need to be considering further down the road. So that would be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing that I have to say is I'm not exactly sure that I'm on board with this yet, but I'm prepared to vote in favor of it, to move it forward to council and to the public hearing, to see what my colleagues on council have to say, and of course what the public has to say. So I will be supporting the motion. So if there's nothing further, I'll call the question, and you can register your votes now. And that is passed. Thank you very much. Well, we've done very well on time here. Is there any further business or any other business to come before the committee? Nothing? Okay. And I think our one member of the public deserted us about halfway through. So our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, September the 12th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in these chambers. And if there's nothing further from any of the members, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Gagnon? Councillor Davison? All those in favor, please register your vote. And notice I said in favor, because I can't imagine anybody voting against it. And that is passed. Thank you all very much.